And as ever, thank you, Tatiana. Now to some alarming comments from the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley. He's revealed that some of his armed officers are so scared of facing legal action that they'd rather be confronted by a well-trained terrorist than a London gangster. Rowley's comments come at a time when one armed officer is still waiting to appear before a gross misconduct hearing, a staggering 8 years after he shot dead a man who was trying to help an inmate escape a prison van. And a police marksman will stand trial next year, charged with murdering Chris Cabba, who was shot, if you recall, in London in September 2022. Well, joining me now is former Metropolitan Detective and Firearms Officer Peter Bleksley, great pal of mine. Peter, this is something that really makes you sympathise with the police. They have one of the most dangerous jobs in all of the country. They're expected to put their lives on the line. They're expected to put their safety and their reputation on the line every time they pick up a firearm. And yet it feels as if when they do so, the legal system is there not to protect them, but to punish them.
Yes, well, of course, it's not only the legal system, it's the police disciplinary process, which can take so long. Now, the officer who shot dead the man lying in wait to try and help spring his mate from the prison van, known as W80, has been acquitted at court, stood trial and was acquitted at court. There was then an inquiry and the officer was found to be guilty of no wrongdoing whatsoever. And yet, the Independent Office of Police Conduct have still insisted on a gross misconduct hearing. And those are part of the reasons why 8 years later, this matter is still unresolved. But Sir Mark Rowley is also playing quite a clever game here, because he knows that at the end of January, the officer known as NX121, who is to stand trial for the murder of Chris Cabba, will be named in court, and his name will then enter the public domain. And of course, it's not so long ago that armed officers were absolutely outraged when that officer was charged, and many of them laid down their weapons. So what Rowley is doing quite cleverly here is positioning himself as the armed police officer's spokesperson.
But it seems, Peter, that they need somebody in their corner. As you say, 1,200 Met firearms officers laid down their weapons when that colleague was charged. How much of an influence do you think the media has on this, and the agitators, the activists, the charities? Because so often, of course, it comes to an issue of race or class or poverty, and the police just seem to be attacked from every angle. And sadly, it seems to be the police force's instinct to throw their own officers under the bus.
And let's not forget the lefty lawyers who campaign endlessly to hang any police officer out to dry, no matter what they do. Take, for example, last week, when a police officer was charged with dangerous driving. That officer was racing to a terrorist incident where people were being stabbed. Now, the officer made some mistakes when they were driving, but the jury, quite rightly, found that officer not guilty of dangerous driving. Not only do the Independent Office of Police Conduct appear to be politically swayed from time to time and willing to throw officers in whatever role it is under the bus, but there are, of course, lawyers that represent the families of people who get shot by the police. And they are often very vocal, very militant, and desperately keen to see officers thrown into jail.
Now, Peter, it's also worth pointing out, of course, that no officer, no citizen, nobody in the land should be above the law, and we're not suggesting special treatment, but it does appear sometimes to be the opposite of that. It seems to be that a policeman or a policewoman standing as an officer actually can be used against them.
Every firearms officer who has ever been trained is told on minute one of day one of the training that your actions, even if you merely draw the weapon out of its holster, let alone fire it, all your actions will be subject to the closest scrutiny. And the police are not saying they shouldn't be, but what they want, and what actually is fair, is that the process that they are subjected to should be prompt, professional, not politically swayed, in other words, completely impartial, and should happen within a reasonable time span. And that officers are judged by the criminal level of culpability. And what I mean there is, if somebody goes in front of a criminal court, the jury have to be persuaded of that person's guilt beyond all reasonable doubt. It's not like in a civil case, which is judged on the balance of probabilities. And the police officers want that criminal high bar of evidential proof to take place not only in the courts, naturally, but also in disciplinary hearings. If we can get the processes right so that they're fair and prompt and professional, I think you'll find that a lot of firearms officers' concerns will simply melt away.
And Peter, in a nutshell, if we're at a junction where police are afraid to draw a weapon in case it ends in a legal suit, if we're at a position where British police are more afraid of gangsters than terrorists, and in that split-second moment their entire life could change, are Britain's streets less or more safe than before?
Much, much less safe, because armed police officers not only protect the royals, the Prime Minister, the palaces, the important embassies and the like, but they are out there patrolling the streets in their armed response vehicles 24 hours a day, ready to respond to the terrorists, the gangsters, the lunatics, and all those kind of dangerous people. We need our armed police. They are extremely valuable.
And Peter, what would you like to see change in this situation? You're obviously vastly experienced, so you have the sympathy of, you know what you're talking about. What would you like to see done?
Yeah, I want to see the Independent Office of Police Conduct to be utterly impartial. I want it to stand tall, stand alone, not be swayed by the crowd, not be swayed by politicians, and to be staffed by experienced, professional investigators. That would be an incredibly good start.
Peter Bleksley, every time you come on, every time I speak to you, common sense copper, I just say again, if we have more people like you in charge, we'd have much more of a chance. Peter Bleksley, thank you as ever for joining me on GB News.